I sat down with Bruce Goldsmith to talk about paragliding. Bruce is one of the pioneers in our sport and still works hard to make our sport a better place. The goal here was to pass on as much of Bruce's knowledge as possible to the paragliding community. In this video we're gonna cover the basics of thermaling and gliding, brakes versus weight shift, how brakes affects the profile of the wing. Without further ado, here's the first video. What's more important, weight shift or brake for turning?
Obviously you should do a combination of both to make an efficient turn. You have to be doing weight shift and brake. I mean, it's a good exercise to use a lot of weight shift, and wing overs using weight shift is also a really good exercise that people use sometimes on SIV courses to train at using weight shift.
How does weight shift affect the glider's performance versus the brakes?
Yeah, well, when you put the brakes on, you do disturb the profile. You know, you do get more lift at the beginning of the brake, but quite quickly after you've gone past the minimum sink, then you get worse and worse glide and sink rate as well. That's why flying with weight shift is much more efficient than flying with brake. It's very often a problem for pilots that they fly with too much brake and they lose on efficiency and are not able to stay up because of using too much brake.
How do you find the sweet spot on the brakes?
The more experienced pilots use less and less brake. A beginner pilot learning to thermal, he will, put a lot of brake in and make a very inefficient turn. If you can make the same turn but using say 30% less brake, then you'll get a better sink rate and a more efficient turn. Another example of how to do that is that you need to predict more where the lift is going to be. So if you make a small amount of brake before you get into the lift, then you're already turning when you hit the thermal, and you can just use a tiny amount of brake and you just make small corrections. Whereas if you go into the thermal before you react, then you have to use more brake in order to stay in the thermal. So the greater skill is to be able to use the smallest amount of brake and the most precise turn centering on the thermal.
Anticipation instead of reaction.
Yeah.
And so timing.
It's anticipation, and anticipation enables you to use less brake as well. Also, we're talking about roll oscillations or gliding pitch oscillations. If you just do a very small amount of action early, then it avoids you having to do a large amount of action later on. And so that means your flight is more efficient.
It's like with a car and braking.
Yeah.
You can start braking way ahead and
just
come to the stop smoothly.
Just do a gentle
or
stop.
Slam on the brakes.
Yes, yeah. And that principle applies to everything in flying. So it's all about trying to get smooth movements, flying like you're on a rail. And when you're in a thermal, it's all about getting the perfect turn in the thermal without having to do corrections, the objective is just to get it perfectly right first time. So you're perfectly centered in the thermal. We're using the minimum amount of brake, and that gives you the best climb. And then when you're gliding, you're not wobbling around, there's no pitch movements, there's no roll movements, you're just gliding in a straight line. And it looks like the pilot's doing nothing, but in fact he's doing lots of tiny movements all the time to give him a super efficient glide.